If you're a subscriber to the Level Paths podcast, or if you minister in any capacity in the Appalachian region, you don't want to miss the Appalachian Ministry Conference at Tri-State Bible College, April 22nd and 23rd. This year's conference is a two-day event. The pre-conference starts on Monday, April 22nd at 6 p.m. with Dr. Andrea Clements and Tanner Clements from Uplift Appalachia. The evening will focus on equipping churches and faith-based organizations to serve as the tip of the spear, bringing solutions to the addiction and mental health challenges in Appalachia. Then on April 23rd, author, church planter, pastor, and keynote speaker Dave Earley kicks off day 2 of the conference along with storyteller Tommy Reed, special sessions with Dr. Kevin Yingling, and music from Chosen Road. You can also choose from 16 breakout sessions that cover topics like church planting, engaging the next generation, leading the church from the pulpit, ministering with the Bible as your playbook, measuring leadership success with a plan, and much more. For more information and to register for the Appalachian Ministry Conference at Tri-State Bible College, April 22nd and 23rd, visit tsbc.edu.
The place of so much failure in the church is failure to lead. Guys come in and they have been transformed by somebody's preaching, and that's a good thing, but they're not connecting that to leadership very often. I just see guys constantly losing ministries, or they're just ineffective in their ministries. It's because they're not investing leadership into their preaching, or even just generally in their ministry. And some guys who are actually decent leaders, but that never then intersects with their preaching. And I think that's a huge miss.
From Tri-State Bible College and the Appalachian Ministry Institute, this is the Level Paths Podcast. We're glad you've taken some time to join us. My name is Chris Weigel. For the last 4 years, Dr. Brian Arnold served as the President of Phoenix Seminary. Early in 2024, he answered the call to leave Phoenix and become the senior pastor of First Baptist Church in Paducah, Kentucky. Paducah and Phoenix have practically nothing in common, so why would Dr. Arnold undergo that kind of transition? On this Level Paths podcast, we'll hear Dr. Brian Arnold's story. Dr. Arnold is speaking at the 2024 Appalachian Ministry Conference, and this is a preview into his topic titled, Leading from the Pulpit. Here's Rex.
Welcome, everyone, to the Level Paths podcast. My name is Rex Howe, and I'm here with my brother and partner, Dr. Matt Shamblin of the Appalachian Ministry Institute at Tri-State Bible College. Matt, how's today in Appalachia for you?
Things are going well. The weather's beautiful outside. It's just starting to rain now, but it's been nice and warm for the last couple of days, which is a great change from the 20-degree weather that we had last week. So now it's time for upper respiratory infections and what they call the Ohio Valley crud. So, hey, it's another day in Appalachia.
Hey, brother, that's right. My niece had that crud this week, and we are hoping and praying that it doesn't come to our house. But we have something to look forward to. We have the Appalachian Ministry Conference coming up on April 22nd and 23rd. Right now, on the 4th season of the Level Paths podcast, we are getting to know some of those folks who are going to be speaking at the Appalachian Ministry Conference. And today we have a good friend of mine, Dr. Brian Arnold, Pastor Brian Arnold. I met Brian while he was serving as the President of Phoenix Seminary. We attended some of the same conferences and had a mutual friend that introduced us. And we hit it off right away and shared some of the joys and burdens of presidency in Christian higher education. And Brian now is serving as the senior pastor of First Baptist Church of Paducah, Kentucky. And he's going to be speaking at the Appalachian Ministry Conference on leading from the pulpit. And we're so excited to have him at Tri-State Bible College. Brian, how are you?
Great. It's awesome to be with you guys today.
Well, Brian, let's start with just getting to know you a little bit. Part of what we want to do is introduce you to our folks here in the Tri-State community and beyond. We have listeners that are in the Tri-State area of North Central Appalachia, but as we look at our heat map on the podcast, we've got folks all up and down Appalachia, along the East Coast and the mountain range. We've also got some folks, for whatever reason, have an interest in China and London and Nepal and India in Appalachian ministry. So greetings to all of you out there. But Brian, tell us a little bit about what it was like growing up in Cincinnati, Ohio.
Oh, it's fantastic. So I grew up in a little town called Mason. It was a little town. It's not a little town anymore. My parents moved there because it was a small suburb. Dad was working down in Cincinnati at the time. It's not anymore. It is, I think, the largest public high school in the state of Ohio is now Mason, which it was, I graduated 365. My brother-in-law graduated 6 years before me, like 150 in his class. So it was exploding kind of through my time being raised there. And for those who maybe don't know right where Mason's at, they will probably know where Kings Island is at. And that is kind of the landmark for Mason. From our back porch, you could watch the fireworks every night of what was happening at Kings Island. So it was a great place to grow up. Loved it. Still a long-suffering Bengals fan. A little bit less suffering these days. As long as we can get Joe Burrow healthy, it'll be a great thing to watch him win some Super Bowls. But, a lot of 2-14 seasons growing up, but hang with him. So, yeah, I grew up in Cincinnati. Eventually, Dad became a fire chief. He'd been in the fire service for a long time. So my first swing at a career, if you can say that, was fire and EMS, and did that for about 10 years.
Awesome. Yes, brother. We are long-suffering Cincinnati Bengals fans together.
I know it.
All of us in Appalachia, at least in north central Appalachia, know about making the journey over to Kings Island in Mason, Ohio, and taking our youth groups over there.
That was the downside of having a Kings Island there, is it was always all these tourists.
That's right.
Coming in from the eastern part of the state.
Yep, that's right. Well, tell us a little bit about your faith journey. So, growing up in Cincinnati, seeing the fireworks from Kings Island, Dad was a fire chief. What's your church experience? What's your testimony of faith in Jesus Christ?
I say I grew up in a Christian home barely. When my mom was pregnant with me, my parents were 35 and 29. My mom had been raised Catholic, but I say that they're still committed Catholics, but they were not regular attending Catholics. After Vatican II, my grandfather just said, if they can change the rules, then I just feel like I'm not going to be that dedicated to it. Polish Catholic family. Then my dad was so nominal, I don't know what he was raised, but they had some neighbors up in Marion, Ohio, who believed in sharing the gospel and kind of tag teamed them, invited them to church, and they got saved when they were pregnant with me. So my mom was baptized when I was in the womb. Anyway, I grew up in that family that mom and dad had been young believers, and they loved the Lord. And so grew up going to church, and they were kind of church schizophrenics a little bit because they did not have a strong faith background. So some American Baptist churches, Nazarene, Evangelical Free, back to an American Baptist church. And then my senior year of high school is when I really started taking the faith seriously. So was I saved at 7 when I first made a profession of faith? I may have been. I mean, I feel like I was, if I can say, in and out of faithfulness to the Lord for that decade from 7 to 17. But at 17 years old, I got invited to a Bible study at a friend's house, and he was just walking some other high school dudes through scripture. And I asked, how many of you have actually read your Bible this week? And about half of them raised their hands. And I hadn't read the Bible really ever. And so I got with the guy and just said, hey, let's start reading 2 chapters of Matthew a day. 2 weeks will be done. Well, 2 days I was done with Matthew, on to the rest of the New Testament. And that really began the journey, if you will, of following Christ closely, loving his word. And from that, really getting the theological appetite of saying, if I'm going to call myself a Christian, I really need to know what we believe, not just what the Bible says, but also what we believe theologically, and got a taste for, theology, apologetics, things like that early on.
Well, Brian, our editor of this, Chris, is a former Baptist, now Presbyterian, and you've kind of thrown down the gauntlet on infant baptism. If you think you were baptizing an infant, just take some of that.
That's right.
But, so tell us, how did you make the step? You said you worked as a EMS paramedic, and you worked in that field for about 10 years. Yep. How did you make that change from that to ministry, your educational journey? How did all that take place?
Growing up, my dad had been in the Navy from 68 to 72. So we'd go to family vacations at Virginia Beach, where he lived when he was in the Navy. And at 10 years old, I remember sitting out back at a bar with my parents. He was talking to some sailors and just thinking, man, I would love to do the military. So from the time I was 10 until my senior year in high school, that's what I thought I was going to do. I was accepted to Virginia Military Institute and Citadel out of high school. I was going to go to VMI, commissioned as a Marine Corps infantry officer, and the rest was going to be history. But it was my last year of high school, I went to vocational school because they had an ROTC program. And I wanted to be involved in that, but also fire and EMS. So my last 2 years of high school were getting that kind of training. I was already engaged on the fire department where my dad was a fire chief. So as the Lord was moving in my heart, and some things were shifting in my life. The plan to do the military thing kind of fell through. EKU, where my sister had gone, has a really good fire science program. It's between them and the National Fire Academy, typically, of who is the best fire science program. So thought, okay, well, I'll go kind of in that direction. Was an emergency medical care major with the fire science minor at Eastern Kentucky University. It was at that time that I started feeling called to ministry. I was involved in Campus Crusade for Christ, which is a huge part of my growing in the faith during the college period, and just feeling that call to ministry. Maybe God could use me in ministry. Other people saying, "Hey, have you thought about doing ministry?" And so knowing even in college, as I was working in fire and EMS on breaks and things like that, and during college, that I'd probably be heading towards ministry. Graduated from EKU, went to Southern Seminary, and then put myself through seminary working full-time as a paramedic during that period. So got my EMT license in 01 when I was graduating high school, and then worked to some degree in EMS full-time from 04 to 12 in that realm. But, worked my last shift in EMS in 2013 while I was pastoring. So it was great. It was a really wonderful opportunity to work full-time and be able to go to school full-time. The Lord really provided in that way. But a lot of people try to think, man, that's pretty similar. You go from kind of saving lives to saving lives to the soul aspect of it. But really, I can't think of anything like further apart, because one of the things about being a good paramedic is you have to have a lot of distance emotionally from your patient if you're going to be able to survive psychologically for 10 years or 20 years or 30 years in that career. So where ministry is the exact opposite. It is, I have to engage emotionally. I have to get into those messy places. I drop off the patient at the hospital. I never see them again. I never hear about them again. I've been with them for 20 minutes and I move on with my life. As a pastor, I get the phone call that the paramedics have just taken the patient or one of our members to the hospital, and now I'm there, and you're walking with them through a funeral, you're walking with them through months of cancer treatments, or whatever that is. It's just a very different calling.
So how did you end up from EMS pastoring to president of Phoenix Seminary?
Yeah, this podcast is 4 hours, right? So even during my paramedic time, I wanted to get my foot in the door in ministry. So from the time I was 21 years old, I'd be applying to churches. And let me just say to anybody out there wanting to go into ministry and you're discouraged because you just can't get your foot in the door, that's where I was for about 8 years, applying to different places. I remember when I almost threw in the towel on ministry, I was on Southern's website and looking at pastoral jobs. It was a church in the Everglades in Florida. During peak season, there was 40 people in the church. And off season, there's 20 people in the church, and you had to have 3 to 5 years of experience. And I just thought, forget it. Like, I will never actually get into ministry because everybody wants 3 to 5 years of experience, which you can't get until you have 3 to 5 years of experience. So I gave my wife's pastor my resume, and he gave it to a friend of his who's a director of missions in Western Kentucky. That got my foot in the door. But even then, I get this phone call in December of 2011, and the first question is this David Black's son-in-law? And I am. And I said, yes. And he said, okay, that's what I need to know. I said, I'm sorry, who is this? And he's like, oh, yes. I'm a director of missions in Western Kentucky. Got your resume. I'm on the search committee at this church. And I just wanted to see if that was the connection, if I was making that connection right. And that got me into this church, which was 60 people or so, 50 to 60 people. It was so rural in Western Kentucky. It's the only county in Kentucky without a stoplight. Only county in Kentucky without a McDonald's. It's the kind of place you imagine God is just kind of dropping you off at the edge of the world to forget that you exist. And that was my first ministry. And God blessed it. It was wonderful. Enjoyed my time there. The people were awesome. Got to see the Lord do some really great things through our ministry there. But I'd always wanted to teach. And so I'd gotten the PhD. Actually, my first year pastoring was when I wrote my dissertation, which I do not advise to anybody. Pretty hectic. And a friend of mine from Phoenix Seminary reached out and just said, hey, are you interested in teaching? And I'd almost given up on that dream. So loved pastoral ministry, felt like the Lord was really blessing our efforts there. And it was March of 2014. I was submitting a paper for ETS, the Evangelical Theological Society. And I sat down and talked to my wife. I said, look, I don't like having a foot in both worlds. I don't like feeling discontent in the pastorate. Nothing's materialized. In fact, I sent out tons of resumes to different places that that had openings for teaching. The only school I'd ever heard back from was Biola and Talbot. They both had a spot open. I heard back from them almost immediately. They had to have received my application, shredded it, and sent me a letter. It said something like, "Dear Dr. Arnold, ha ha ha, not a chance." And I told Lauren, my wife, I said, "I'm tired of when these things come open, you have to spend a day or two just refreshing your resume for that." I didn't feel like it was fair to the people at my church that my attention would be distracted. So I said, look, this will be my last time going to ETS. If something doesn't materialize, I'll just assume that the Lord wants me in pastoral ministry. That was March, got my paper accepted in June. And in August, my friend called me from Phoenix Seminary and said, "Are you interested in a teaching position? If so, I'll throw your hat in the ring," which led to at San Diego in 2014, getting to have my interview with the faculty at Phoenix Seminary, and the rest is history as far as getting out to Phoenix. Now, here's one of the funny parts. If people know Phoenix Seminary, oftentimes it's because Wayne Grudem teaches there. Wayne has had such an impact on my own theology, and I know on the theology of so many people in this generation. Kind of what I feel like John Piper in many ways preached into existence. Wayne Grudem was kind of the theologian undergirding a lot of people's theology. Well, you had to deliver your paper, and they were sending different faculty to the different guys who were in the pipeline for the potential position at Phoenix Seminary. And in my room, I was doing a paper on justification in the Odes of Solomon. Exhilarating stuff, right? There's only 4 people in the room. The moderator, Peter Gurry, because he wanted to support me and felt bad for me. Adam Smith, who I'd mentioned had been at First Baptist Ashland for a while, and Wayne Grudem. That was it. So you got to deliver this paper like there's 1,000 people in the room, and you're giving it your all as best you can. And it went well, obviously, and went out to Phoenix Seminary. And it wasn't long that I was there that I realized there was a lot of untapped potential at the seminary. The leadership was just kind of getting older and ready to retire. He was shot at, man, I've wanted an opportunity to teach, and now a door's opened, and the seminary is just struggling. So what can I do from my position in faculty to help the seminary be successful? Well, by the opportunity of doing that and kind of getting into some leadership positions early on, it gave me the opportunity then when the presidency came open to at least throw my name in, and not expecting to get it. We don't have enough time, I'm sure, to go into it, but I was the guy who never should have gotten the job. Just to be honest, Carter Baldwin has been doing this for 40 years, doing executive searches. This was the first time in their history that the top 2 candidates said no, and then it fell on me. And it was a great opportunity early on to recognize the Lord's hand is in it. There can be no pride or arrogance in this. Just let's get the job done and build a school that has, I hope, a strong reputation theologically, one that cares about. Our motto there was scholarship with the shepherd's heart. We want to have the best of Christian scholarship, and we want people whose hearts have been transformed by the gospel of Jesus Christ, and then to go into ministry, minds full and hearts ablaze for the glory of God.
Yeah. So how do you go from seminary president to back to the pastorate?
Yeah, things were going really well. We were coming off of one of our strongest years in the seminary's history. We had broken through the 300 student barrier, which kind of puts you in a different place as far as the Association of Theological Schools is concerned, which was about a 75% increase in new student enrollment from when I started to that point, which was really exciting. The faculty that had been drawn in was really great. Just good things. We'd hit our financial goal of fundraising for the previous year. And so I was surprised to get the phone call from the guy who I'd mentioned to you before. My wife's former pastor, who got me into the church in Western Kentucky, was serving as the interim pastor at First Baptist Paducah. So it's kind of his fault, my whole life story, as far as vocation goes. I told the church when I got here, I said, the biggest threat to me leaving will be if Larry ever calls me and tells me that there's some other assignment for me, because apparently I just do whatever he says. He's an old retired Marine recon guy, and it's like, yes, sir, I will do whatever you ask me. But my wife and I were like, no, there's probably no chance. We didn't even want to take the conversation at first, but he's an old friend, and we had the conversation. So things were going really well at the seminary. I was not at all intending to leave. It's a bit of a longer story. We actually said no to the church at first. There's some leadership transition happening at the seminary. There's nothing nefarious, nothing bad going on. But if you, 2 of the top guys transition out, and the president leaves at the same time, it just doesn't look good. So my wife and I both said, hey, let's see this through transition and just say no to the church. So we did. And that was early November of 22. And moved on fully back into it. And the Lord kept just moving in our hearts. And I was getting dissatisfied with the fact that about 80% of my time was fundraising. I spent an inordinate amount of time. I mean, we needed about 80% of our funds came through fundraising. We had no subsidies from a denomination. We had to keep tuition at a competitive rate with some of the SBC schools. Some of the things I know Rex, I'm sure, deals with constantly. And it's a lot of pressure to raise the amount of money that we need to raise annually. And then the other part of my life was just meetings. I would call it ministry by proxy. I was doing pastoral ministry, that's frontline, that's God's plan for this world, the local church. Then I was teaching, and it was great because I'm talking to a room full of 20 students, and they represent 20 different ministries and the impact that you have. Then you go into the presidency, and it's like I raise money so that my professors can teach, so that their students can do the work of the ministry. I like being a little bit more hands-on than that, and it was getting very dissatisfying. And then when I was asked to teach, it always just felt like an extra burden that I didn't really want to do, which was concerning to my heart. So November, we'd said no. We were fully kind of back in. January, I preached at a youth conference and just loved it. 530 kids up in Williams, Arizona, just outside of the Grand Canyon. And we got a huge snowfall. It was just idyllic, perfect. My son was with me. And here I was, not thinking about the funds of the seminary, not thinking about the administrative aspects of it, just opening God's word, teaching youth, watching God move through that. And I came home January last year. And that was Monday. On Tuesday, my wife and I sat down and I just said, I really felt like that was amazing. She said, well, this is like the second time in the last 6 months I've seen you actually enlivened and full. The other time when I was preaching at my old church over fall break, and then the time I was speaking to the youth. So she said, that's something we got to really probably consider. But First Baptist Paducah had seemed like a great opportunity, and we'd said no to it. My wife's family is about an hour from here. I'd already been in Western Kentucky. I had a network of pastors here that I'm already friends with. So many things that I loved about this spot. I like church revitalization. I wanted a church that we have a 184-year history. We've gone through serious decline. Like that sounded like a perfect opportunity. And we said no. So then it was like, okay, Lord, did you use that just to break our grip a little bit? And then you're going to open up something else. So we didn't know. And so we just started praying even that Tuesday. 6:30 a.m. on Thursday morning, I get an email from the chairman of the search committee at First Baptist Paducah. And he said, 3 months ago, you told us no, but we've been praying and we unanimously still think you're the guy. Would you be open to a conversation? Amazing seeing how the Lord kind of orchestrated that. And my wife, if there's like a spectrum of, we should stay in Phoenix or we should go. When this first started, both of us were saying we probably shouldn't leave Phoenix right now. And she was really on the end of the timing's not right. I think we need to say no. And I was like, I think you're right, And then on this side, when all that started happening and she could see the Lord moving in my heart, the Lord moving in her heart, the search committee reaching back out as we just begin to pray about this again. I went from like, man, we should really pursue this. And she's over here like, if we don't do this, we're disobeying God,
Yeah. Wow,
the Lord's
man.
will.
That is incredible. There's so many other things I want to get into, but
I know.
I want to dig in more to the things that you've said, and we got to move on. But that's why I'm glad you're coming to the conference, because we'll have some time to talk.
The Appalachian Ministry Conference is coming up at Tri-State Bible College on April 22nd and 23rd. It's 2 days of leadership training designed specifically for ministry in Appalachia. Keynote speaker Dave Early, special sessions with Dr. Kevin Yingling, music from Chosen Road, and 16 breakout sessions. Regular registration is $30. Senior pastor registration is $20. The conference begins at 8 a.m. on Monday, April 22nd, and wraps up at 5 on Tuesday, April 23rd.
Let's move to preview what you're going to speak about at the conference. So let's kind of start with something fun, Brian. Who would you say are some of the major preaching influences in your pulpit ministry?
You always got to start with the guys that that personally impacted and influenced you. The guys that you first heard do it, that you thought, oh, I wonder if I could do that. Man, could God use me to do that? So my youth pastor, the guy that I'd mentioned who had brought me over to his house, small group Bible study, he said, why don't you come to church with me? And that was a Southern Baptist church. So that's when I kind of came into the Southern Baptist world, was January of 2000. And his youth pastor, which became my youth pastor because I started going to church there, his name was Eric Geiger. Just never heard preaching like that. So for people who may not know that name, he wrote a book called Simple Church with Tom Rain. He was a vice president at Lifeway. He's now senior pastor of a large church out in California called Mariners. Just one of the best communicators of the gospel I've ever heard. Wrote Creature of the Word with Matt Chandler. Just very, very gifted guy. And I was just enamored week by week in hearing him preach. Campus Crusade in college, a guy named Jason Morris who discipled me. And he speaks a lot like Tim Keller, just kind of more subdued, but just deep and thoughtful. And that was impactful. And then my pastor in college, Adam Dooley, who's now pastor at Inglewood Baptist Church in Jackson, Tennessee. Guys had outsized influence on me, taking me out to eat, giving me opportunities. Adam Dooley's the one who taught me how to preach, gave me those first opportunities to do it. He can't be blamed for the final product, but I'm grateful to him for walking me through that and being an influence. And then the guys who you may not know personally, but have had a substantial impact. John Piper's at the top of that list, leaps and bounds on top of that list. So my first semester in college, they were not going through the Bible in Campus Crusade. They were going through a book called Desiring God. And I thought, how strange. Why are they doing that? And I thought that summer, well, I'm going to give that book a read and just kind of see what I think. That was revolutionary to me. That God is most glorified when we are most satisfied in him, right? That was like life-changing, revolutionary for me, just to think about delighting in God in some of those ways. One of the coolest experiences of my life is that when I became president at Phoenix Seminary, I reached out to Wayne Grudem and just said, Wayne, I don't ask you for a whole lot of favors, but could you get John Piper to preach my inauguration? And we did. So John Piper preached my inauguration at Phoenix Seminary. It sounds like such an awesome opportunity to have one of the legends of preaching in this last 100 years and the guy you've thought so highly of come and preach for you until you realize in that moment, I've got to preach after John Piper. That's where that idea was not so awesome. I remember sitting up there just thinking, like he just crushed it. And now I'm going to just embarrass myself. And I did. So anyway, that was really cool. Guys like Tim Keller, I think, are just phenomenally gifted, and Al Mohler, both of them, at how to bring an intellectual depth into preaching. How do we take cultural pieces? How do we take other thinkers throughout history and weave them into the story of Scripture and help that come through an application? And that was deeply impactful because I early on wanted an intellectually satisfying faith. If I'm going to give my life to this, I want to know that it stacks up in the philosophies of the world. I want to know that there is depth to this. And then learning and still learning, how do you bring that across in preaching when most people are not there? They're not ready to take on Charles Taylor, for instance. How do you take some of those ideas and concepts, make them manageable for people, and bring them into your preaching? I mean, that's one of the things we can even talk about here in a minute. But so those guys would be big. And then what you just kind of pick up from other people, of like a Matt Chandler, who just lights on fire when he goes into the pulpit. And it reminds me of John Wesley, probably apocryphally attributed to him, but saying, catch on fire with enthusiasm, and people will come from miles to watch you burn. And man, that I just think is so true in preaching, that if you show people, I believe this with all my heart, mind, soul, and strength, and you just preach your guts out, people want to be there for that. They want to know that it's changed your life, both in the way you live, but also in the way that you preach. So those would be some of the big influences, I would say, for me.
You know, Brian, as I listen to you talk about the influences on your preaching, you have a guy who preaches more in what I'm going to call a more modern way with Eric Geiger. And then you have the influences of John Piper and others like him. You said a couple names, a lot of those are in the same line. And then you threw in Adam Dooley. And if there is ever a guy who really bridges the gap between traditional Southern Baptist voice to a more modern Southern Baptist voice, it's really Adam Dooley. I mean, Adam co-authored books with Jerry Vines. Because of our age, I'm going to say if there's any young guy that sounds like a modern Jerry Vines, it's an Adam Dooley. I can hear his voice in my mind, and I'd like to attempt to just, mimic it, but I'm not going to be able to do that. But anyway, I mean, I love to hear that because there's just a lot of guys. You're drawing from a lot of different sources. All of these are I mean, really come in a lot of ways from diverse fields of diverse, and when I mean that, not, they're not widely different theologically, but they really kind of have a different preaching voice, each and every one of them.
Yeah.
It's kind of neat to hear, just kind of bringing that together, because a lot of guys, we're going to stay in this one vein. We're not going to be influenced by anything outside of that vein. And, you kind of become almost a clone of that. I just was reading Spurgeon yesterday, and he said, I hear there are many young Spurgeons out there. He said there's only two who have the right to the Spurgeon name, and that by blood, his sons. And so, God has not called us to be a clone of those others. He's called us, of course, to be who we are, and yet influenced by all those voices. So as we think about that, First Baptist Paducah, great church in Western Kentucky, what does preaching look like there?
One of the things I mentioned before that drew me to the church is its long storied history, 184 years, predating the Southern Baptist Convention by 5 years or so, and then just a strong pulpit ministry. I mean, you've got people like J.S. Cheek, who's famous for baptizing so many people that he died. He was in his young 40s, and they said that he just, through exhaustion, when revival had come, baptized over 1,000 people in like a month or two period and just died. You get that. You get great preachers like John Wood and Bob White who have been in this pulpit. So you're stepping into something that's a bit of a legacy that you recognize you are just tending the church for a very small period of time in what its history has been. Even if the Lord gives me 30 years here, it'll be a very small fraction. So we must just be faithful in this generation. So I just made a new members booklet for our folks, and I have this quotation in here from Dr. Celsus Toll, who was pastor here in 1914. And it comes as a larger part of a wonderful quotation. But he says, "Never has there been a moment for the world to doubt the loyalty of this pulpit to the faith once for all delivered to the saints." I love that. I love being able to tell our church that's been our legacy since 1914, even before that in 1840. It's our legacy today in 2024, and Lord willing, in 2124, that's going to continue to be true of this church. So the first thing about preaching in a place like this is you are an inheritor of something before that is part of the wonderful tradition of the church. Faith once for all delivered to the saints, handed down. And that's a stewardship. And I take that pretty seriously. Specifically what preaching looks like, on Sunday mornings, I preach for about 40 minutes. And we actually don't have Sunday night services anymore. That's something that surprised me when I came here. I teach some on Wednesday night, but that's a lot different. Last semester, I call them semesters, did theology proper. So really deep study on who is God. And then this semester, evangelism and discipleship. But when I'm preaching, I think they've had varied tastes over the years, if I'm being honest, between like topical preaching and expository preaching. It's funny because I like expository preaching better. I think it's a better diet for people overall. And yet, since I've been here, I've kind of done more topical preaching because, as I think about even the topic that I'm going to be speaking on at the conference is I want to make sure in my first year that we're all on the same page on some really important things. For instance, I spent 8 weeks on what is the gospel. So I want to make sure that you know the gospel, that it's very clear, and that through my preaching the gospel, you learn how to communicate the gospel. Like you will be better evangelizers, if you will, if you know with clarity what the gospel is. So I want to be able to do that. And then when I say the word gospel, in my preaching or in my teaching, that you have an idea of where to go back to, that when I say that, it should trigger for you what we preached on in January, because I always like to preach on Right to Life Sunday. And then I follow that up with a sermon on racial reconciliation. I made the whole month about kind of like, we called it the Christian way, ethics rooted in truth. Did things like what I call the erosion of Western society, which is very much like a Carl Truman kind of rise and triumph of the modern self. And then the next week on sex, and then abortion and racial reconciliation. And I'm just getting out of a 5-week series on what is the church. So, we're kind of getting that all, like this year is like the year of establishment, if you will. And then I'm moving into 12 weeks on the minor prophets. So 1 week per minor prophet. I'm going to hit Jonah on Easter, and that'll be my Easter text for this year. Then into Philippians, hopefully, Lord willing, into the fall, Matthew, and then we will be in Matthew until Jesus comes back. I mean, it's going to be funny, kind of a weird gear shift for me to kind of do some of these 4 or 5 week topical kind of series to a very long expository series to the book of Matthew.
As a pastor in Eastern Kentucky, where pragmatism seems like it's held tight grip, what we're seeing is a commitment to expository preaching, a commitment to actually just preaching the word, teaching what God says in his word, is exactly what we find in Scripture. This is how Jesus builds his church, not through the pragmatic, program-driven circus, but rather a commitment to the word. People come to hear the word. And it sounds like to me that's exactly what you're seeing there in Western Kentucky as well.
It's a wonderful recovery in our day. I mean, we've got people to thank like John MacArthur, who just showed what it was like to open up the text and dissect it down to the bone on his preaching week in and week out. And a lot of men were helped by that. And now we want to replicate that. And it's for the betterment of the church. Like you said, I mean, a lot of people, when they shoot for pragmatism, I'm gonna maybe alter C.S. Lewis here a little bit, right? C.S. Lewis said, if you aim for primary things, you get secondary things. If you aim for secondary things, you miss both of them. I think a lot of times when we shoot for pragmatism, we miss everything. But when we really shoot for a robust, serious, theologically driven ministry, it's amazing how pragmatic that is. It is not to sacrifice pragmatism to say that we're going to be a theologically driven ministry. It's actually to build up pragmatism better. Same thing we had at the seminary. You know, this was the constant battles, people who said we're getting too theological and not practical enough. And I would just say constantly, no, the more theological we are, the more we lean into the academic side, the more that people have to draw from in their ministries. And that's going to be incredibly practical and pragmatic.
And Brian, that really is a belief, not just in inerrancy and infallibility, but also in the sufficiency of Scripture.
That's right.
The Scripture is sufficient, according to the Apostle Paul, that the Lord has given us. He makes us complete for every good work. We don't have to go outside of that in order to instruct people in the Word. We can bring it to bear in their lives and see how that directs their lives and stand still and see the deliverance of the Lord.
I'm loving what I'm hearing, and I'm teaching homiletics right now. So we went through one of our books is Keller's book on preaching, and he talks about expository as the main diet, and then but you also have evangelistic and prophetic and catechetical and festal preaching. And I hear you wanting to get everyone on the same page, but also having that steady diet of exposition. You're building a community, Brian. That's what I hear you saying. A community that's together with one mind and following the Spirit. So hearing the way you're leading your people from the pulpit, why is it important to lead the congregation from the pulpit?
I love the topic that you've given me. It's near and dear to my soul. Having been in ministry, being around a lot of pastors, then leading a seminary and getting to help train a generation of pastors, it is the place of so much failure in the church is failure to lead. And I think guys come in and they have been transformed by somebody's preaching and they want to go out and do that. They want to replicate that. And that's a good thing. They want to be that vessel used by God for the good and change of other people. But they're not connecting that to leadership very often. And where I just see guys constantly losing ministries or they're just ineffective in their ministries is because they're not actually investing leadership into their preaching or even just generally in their ministry. And some guys who are actually decent leaders, but that never then intersects with their preaching. And I think that's a huge miss. And so I want to be communicative to the congregation. There's so many things happening Monday through Friday at the church, leadership decisions that are being made, things that are going on, that we can just assume that people know what that is. We can just assume that they know where the church is headed in direction. They don't know. They don't live in it all the time. So how do we lead in those areas? So I'll give you just even for instance, 3 things that I would tell somebody not to do in their first year of ministry at a church. Go to elders, do a fundraising campaign, and rebrand. And we've done them all this year. Now, in defense of that, the church was already moving. I've never seen the church do this before in my life. They were moving to elders between pastors. There's been so much turnover in leadership. It leaves us unstable as a congregation. And most of all, just, hey, you know what? The Bible, before it talks about deacons, talks about this group of people called elders, and we don't have them. So how do we start to incorporate that? So they were most of the way through that. I asked them to kind of stall out the process till I could come. But really, I just took a 1-footer and putted it in by the time I got here. So, but that's new for the church, which means I've got to communicate more about that. I've got to remind them that we have elders. I got to remind them that the elders are pastoral in nature and what their roles and responsibilities are. I got to remember that the congregation is not going to be as engaged in some of the decisions, so that when we're doing things, I've got to explain that at times in my preaching, or when I get up to preach, just remind them, hey, this is what's going on right now, and see that as a vision opportunity. I've even tried to get the staff to recognize announcements are really vision casting. We are trying to pare down the amount of announcements we have so that we can say, this is what really matters for the success of the ministries of the church, for your discipleship. These are the things that we think are going to be most important. So investing kind of in that. In my series on what is the church that I just did, we had a week on service, giving, and membership. So this past week on membership, I'm talking about, here's some new procedures even that we're going to be doing for membership. So I set the stage. I'm going through why I think the New Testament teaches membership. I'm going through what the benefits of membership are, but then I'm going to say, but let me get really practical. Here's what this looks like at our church. Here's why we're doing this. We're going to do a new members class. We're going to have a membership interview, just so that you know the gospel and so that we can protect the church as well. Because in this day and age, just having somebody walk the aisle and everybody clapping and now they're a member is a really dangerous thing and irresponsible for us to do as a church. But if I just go to that, but I haven't explained it to the church, not only is it not going to get implemented well, it's going to cause other downstream leadership challenges just because you haven't communicated clearly to the congregation as you're going. So I think it's imperative. Or, we did the fundraising campaign because we needed to do some renovation kinds of work, and all that's attached to vision. So I took a whole service and just dedicated it to that, explained everything that we're going to be doing. The Lord was great. Our people were gracious. And when we had our Giving Sunday, we exceeded the amount that we had asked for, which was encouraging. But then I've got to follow that up with, hey guys, here's where we're at in these processes. Here's where we're at in rebrand was part of that money that we asked for, and building a new youth area was part of that. But I've got to be communicative on those things. And the more that I do that, the more that I gain trust. And the more that I gain trust, the better they hear the rest of my preaching. So it's not just constant leadership lessons or something like that. In fact, it's rarely that, but I'm going to find places to interject preaching with what is happening in the church and how we're leading the church and what the elders are thinking through right now, because that brings peace to their mind. And again, just allows them to, as sheep, and sheep we know in scripture are very anxious creatures. It allows the anxious flock to feel the love and tenderness of the shepherd, to know that the shepherd is going somewhere, leading them to a good pasture, and that's going to actually increase my ability to lead.
That's Dr. Brian Arnold, the senior pastor of First Baptist Church in Paducah, Kentucky. You can hear more of Dr. Arnold's Leading from the Pulpit topic at the Appalachian Ministry Conference at Tri-State Bible College, April 22nd and 23rd. Tri-State Bible College and the Appalachian Ministry Institute exist as a resource, and no matter what need you may have, Rex Howe and Dr. Matt Shamlin want you to reach out to them today. Rex Howe is the president of Tri-State Bible College. You can contact him by email at rex.howe@tsbc.edu. And you can reach out to Dr. Matt Shamlin at the Appalachian Ministry Institute by email, matt.shamlin@tsbc.edu. The Level Paths Podcast is an outreach of Tri-State Bible College and the Appalachian Ministry Institute.